Welcome back. So in this tutorial we're going to be talking about model views, and the intention for using model views is to make your UI and data communication better. So how this will work is I will have three parts of this. I will have the beginning of this video, which will be where I sort of on an overview basis describe how this works and compare it to a few other approaches. And then we will be going hands-on and going through a few different examples that I will walk you through from beginning to end to create and get the functionality up and running. And then in the end I will be going through a little bit about the pros and cons with it and such. So, starting off, this is a basic third-person character template project that I have here. Nothing is in it currently. And the feature that we're using today is model view, and we can find it up here if we go to edit and to plugins. We can type in model view and we'll have a few different options here. You can see here that the UMG view model is what we're going to be using, and it's in beta, which means that even though I'm using 5.5 today, this will look differently in other versions that are prior to 5.5, and it might look different in versions that are coming after, and functionality might be moving around a little bit, but all the knowledge should more or less be the same and useful for you anyway. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be starting off with clicking in that we want to make use of this, and we want to restart this engine with the plugin activated. So let's proceed with explaining the actual concepts then. So normally, when one wants to communicate with the UI, one has something that is considered sort of a container or a component or a character or some sort of blueprint or maybe object that holds some data. So this is our blueprint in this case. Whoa. There we go. So we have a blueprint over here, and over here we have health, let's say. So that's an H for health. And then we have our UI, which is this other container over here. And over here we might have something like numbers or texts or progress bars or something like that to display the health over here in some manner. Now, normally on this channel I have been showing off the concept of event dispatchers for this, so that when the health is changed here in some regard, then we have sort of like a speaker that is sort of broadcasting that the health has been changed, and you have through an event dispatcher, and then you have the UI which has bound to that event dispatcher, so it will be reacting to this broadcast and then changing the UI to correspondingly show what is happening inside of the UI in regards to the health or hit points. Another way of doing this, which is not a good way of doing it, let's say, is making use of the bindings that are available inside of UI. All of the different parts of the UI has a little button where you can say bind, and you can just hook up some code to it and it will run. The problem with that is that what will happen between the UI and the blueprint is that the code will run every single frame on the UI, and even though nothing is happening to the health, it will still update it with new health. So you get, for example, if you have 120 frames per second running at your game, the health will update 120 times, even if it didn't change anything. So it's basically a very inappropriate way of handling information and updating UI. This is why the broadcasting through event dispatchers is better, because it only happens when a change happens to health, and the UI is therefore only updated when the health is changed. So how is this different from model views? Well, model views is very similarly. We have the same situation here with a blueprint with some information like the health over here, and we have the UI over here with our progress bar, for example. And we still want to communicate between these two, but we do introduce a third layer here, which is the model view. So this layer in between here, the model view, is acting as the intermediary between the data and the UI. So the data will keep track of its health and do all of the different things. And then when it has some information that it wants to notify the model view with, then it will send a message to the model view. And the model view in turn will be keeping track of which things are set up in such a way that when they are changed, they should notify anyone. So it will work in a similar way with the broadcasting over here, that only when a change happens to relevant objects or relevant fields, then it will send out a broadcast saying this was updated. The UI in this case will use something like the the second method in the way that I explained it, which is the bindings. So it will bind a field over here to a field in the model view. The difference here being that it will actually only listen to when it gets notified by the model view that something has changed that is affecting the UI, and therefore it will just go over here and say what happened and get the information and send it back to the UI, and then it will update it. So it's a combination of these two approaches that this is making use of, and that is why it's sort of a simpler yet effective way of handling things. So let's actually demonstrate how this works. So we have now restarted with our plugin, and let's create some simple logic for this. So in our third-person character, in our blueprints here, we can take the third-person character and we can hook it up here. And here we can add some basic code that is going to be our health system. So we create a health variable, for example. We make it of the type float. So this is the normal health that we have when we're not doing anything or just at any point in time. We can have a max health just so we can keep track of things like the relationship between our current health and what it maximally can be. So now that we have compiled, we can set our max health to be something like 100 and our current health to be something like, 50, just so we see that it is something different essentially. Then normally we would have on any damage event that's not what I wanted to do. Any damage event, we would have, when damage is incoming to us, we would handle it in some way. So in this case we get some damage coming in, so we'll take our health, not set health, actually we needed that one as well, I could have kept that one. So we want to get our health, we want to subtract it with the damage that is incoming, that way we get our new health, and then we want to set our health to be the health that is now recalculated. That's basic for most health systems. So in addition to this, we would set up something like a UI. So to have a UI, we want to keep track of our player controller. So we're going to be dragging out a variable here from our play controller and say we want to save it. We can keep it as a play controller as a variable name for now. So this is sort of the beginning of this. Now we want to have a UI as well. So let's go to our folder here and say we want to have user interface. We want to have a widget blueprint of the user widget type. We'll call it w_HUD. We'll keep this very simple. We'll just add a canvas panel to our HUD over here, so we have something very basic to move things around in. And then we can add a text widget to our canvas panel. We can put it somewhere in the middle like that. So this is supposed to be our hit points then. So what we want to do is we want to have, as our health is updated, we want to update our health in the form of text over here. To alleviate and make this possible, we'll go over here and we'll type in pain, so we can get a pain causing volume. We can place that somewhere here. We can place a sort of box nearby it so we know that where this is, because it's not visible to begin with. So now we have a pain causing volume, and if we step into this one over here, we're going to get damaged by it, but we don't have any feedback of this right now. We need to add our HUD to our actual viewport. So we'll create a small event, custom event. We'll call it setup UI or something like that. And then we'll call setup UI over here. So inside of the event over here, we want to do some very basic things. We want to create a widget. We want this widget to be, of course, of the type that we created, so the w_HUD. And this widget normally would want to have a player controller as well into it. And then we want to add this widget to our viewport so that it's actually showing on the screen. So if we were to compile and run now, we can see that we get a text block because that's the text that we added to our HUD. But nothing is happening because we don't have any logic between our data and our UI currently. So how to create this with model view then? Well, also, if you're interested in knowing how to do this with event dispatchers, I'll leave a link to another tutorial where I show off how that works, if that's something that you're not familiar with as well. So you have some reference for that as well. Or maybe if you prefer that over this method, that could also be the case. Anyway, so let's create some model views then. So we go to the Blueprint class here, and we open up for all classes here, and we type in model view. And now we get some classes here that are available thanks to the plugin that we added earlier. So we want to have the view model base here as our view model, and we can call this mv_health or something like that. Opening that up, we see that it's basically like any normal blueprint, sort of. What we want to do here is, since this is going to work as an intermediary between our character where we keep track of our data like health and max health, we want to have these variables tracked here as well then. So we have health here, so we can have something that we want to interact with, and we want to make it of a float type. And we'll make another one for max health also, like so. Now, these variables are the ones that are going to communicate with the UI. How do they do that? Well, they do it through the field notify. So you can see here there's a little bell. So the bell represents this checkbox over here, which is the field notify. If I click this checkbox, you can see that this bell lights up. So this is now marked as a field that will send information whenever it is changed. So how does this work then? How does the communication work between the UI and the health view? Because now we have the different parts. We have the data, we have the model view, and we have the UI, but there's no communication between these three objects. So the first thing is that we need to create some way of creating the actual model view itself, an instance of it. And this can be done in a few different ways. I believe there are 4 different ways, and we will not be going into a whole lot of depth in the different characteristics of those and what the different pros and cons are. But if this is something that's of interest to you, you should probably check to see which of these fit your situation the best. But for now, let's just go with one of them, and I'll explain it as we go along. For now, we'll create a custom event, and we can call this setup MV or something like that, so model view then. And we want to, in this case, call it before the UI, and I'll explain why. So in this case, we have a model view we're setting up, and is set up in the UI. So the setup MV here, what we need to do is we need to get access to a subsystem that we have access to now thanks to the plugin. So if we right click and type in model, actually it's MVVM, which stands for model view model. And if we type in sub, we get a few different subsystems here. The one that we're interested in today is the one that's called game subsystem. Inside of the game subsystem, we can drag out here and we can say that we want to get the view model collection. This one, I believe, was called global view model collection in earlier versions. I'm not entirely sure, but just so you know that there might be some naming differences here. In addition to that, we then need to say that, okay, we have this collection, now we want to add a view model to this. So dragging off here, we can type in add view model instance. So now we need to send in an instance into this. So what we're actually doing here is we're getting a collection where we can store a bunch of different view models, and we're adding one to this collection. This collection then can be queried by other parts where they can say, I want to have this specific view model, and then they can interact with it. Along one of these is the HUD, and I'll show that in a little bit. But for now, we haven't actually created a view model, so let's do that. So we go here, right click, and we type in create objects. Actually, we don't, it's called constructs. So construct object from class, and we want to create a view model now, but the view model that we want to create is going to be MV health over here. We'll also drag in our player controller here as our sort of owner for this. So now we have a object of this class. We can drag it in here and we can say that, okay, now we have created a view model, we have added it to the collection, and that's good. But there are some more steps involved when it comes to this specific type of creation when we're working towards the global collection. We need to right click on the context over here and split struct. You can see that we get two different things here. These are context identifiers that show what the model view that we're adding is. So in the class here, we need to change to the actual class that we're sending in, and the context name needs to be something that identifies this. So if I were to call this something like health MV, then this will be an identifier that it makes use of later. Okay, in addition to this, there might be a good idea to also promote this variable and store this so we have it later, because in this case we're going to be using this variable here to access it when we want to change something. So we'll change this to our MV ref, like so. So how the communication between the data layer is going to work now is that whenever we take damage, which is up here in our event of any damage, we're going to be saying, well, to this model view, we want to let it know that we have changed our health. So we can set health in the model view. You can see here that we get a set with broadcast. The reason we get this is because of the notify that we have as the bell over here. So dragging in our health here, we can now see that we're sending over our health as we're being damaged or hurt or healed or whatever is affecting our health in different ways. We will be sending the information to the model view. The model view in turn will be updating its health over here, and the notification over here will say if something is listening to this, I will notify it that it has been changed, and it will change accordingly to whatever it wants to do with that new information. So going to our HUD, let's see what we can actually do with the UI now. So inside of the UI here, you can see that I have some tabs over here under my details, which says view models and view bindings. These should be available, but depending on the version, they may not be. If you want to bring them out, if they're not out, you can find them under window and view models over here, and also view bindings. So how this works now is we need to let this UI know that it has a view model that it needs to consider. So we'll go here to view models and click add viewed model, and we can see that we have our MV health here, and we can see a preview of what is available inside of this one. Clicking select on this one, we now get a warning saying that no view will be created for this widget. There are no bindings and there are no events. Your view model won't be initialized. Essentially saying we're not making use of any data from this view model, so we will not be instantiating it inside of the UI to make use of it, essentially. That's because we simply haven't set anything up right now. But let's do that. So one of the things that we're interested in is the health, for example. This is our current health at any point in time, and we want to set our text to represent this value. What we do is we drag this and drag it over this bind button over here, and we drop it over there, and we can see that we have health there now. Now if we were to compile here, the UI wouldn't be very happy with us. It will say that we could not create the binding. The source property health does not match the type, and this is reasonable because what we have here is a text widget. It shows text. What we have over here is a float type. They don't really match. By going to our view bindings, we can see that this is actually what's lighting up red over here as a problem. But this is something that we can overcome. We can make use of conversions for this. So in this case, we can go over here and we can click and say that we want to convert this value instead. So through a conversion here, we can say that, well, we have a float and we want to have a text. So we can say to text from float. Selecting that, we now get the possibility of changing that this text here is supposed to be converted from a float value. Now, It needs to know which float value. It needs to have some rules like how it's supposed to round it if there's rounding, what it handles with positive and negative values and different ranges and groupings and things like that. So you can configure here quite a lot of how you want to display this. For our case, we're just going to keep this simple. So we're going to go over here to say that we want to assign a bind to this. And the bind comes from our model view for health, and it is the health field that we're interested in. So now we have assigned that, we compile, and it says it's much happier. We go back to view models, it is not done yet. Going to mark our MV health over here, we can see that we have some different settings here. Among them is the creation type that I mentioned earlier. The creation type in this case were the global view model collection that I told you about earlier, so that's what we're going to be choosing. But you can see here that there are a bunch of different ways of handling this creation. Inside of this, we also find that now that we have chosen a global view model collection, we have the global view identifier. This is the same one that we set up, if you remember, down here. It's our context over here. So copying that to make sure that we don't type in anything erroneously, we can just paste it over here. And then you have some different options like setter options, getter functions, and global view model collection update. I would recommend for most cases probably that you activate this one, because what this one does, as it says, it will try to keep the instance up to date if you remove, add, or change a view model for some different reasons. So depending on what you're doing with it, that might be a factor. Now, if we go here and press play, we have 0 life, which is of course odd. If we go into our pain volume, you can see that we're actually having our health go up to 50, which is the value we set as the start, and then it's decreasing. So the reason for this is two things. First, the same way that we created the information here that we update our event damage, the initial values are never being set. So what we can do is when we're actually, let's refresh this node, because it has, we have been changing the creation types in between the compiles. That's why it was showing up red. After having set up the MV here, we might want to set up some initial values. So let's just create a custom event to do that, and we can call this just init health or something like that. And we'll call this one after we have set up the model view. So init health, because then we know that it's actually done and ready. Now, in this case, of course, we're creating this inside of a character. We don't need to create it here. We can create it somewhere else, but this is for simplicity of keeping everything together. We now have our model view reference, and we want to set our health to be something, and we want to set our max health to be something else as well. So we do so, and then we just hook up our health and our max health like that. Now you can see this set over here does not broadcast, because this one has not been set in the model view to have this bell notification. So it won't be updating anybody about what's happening. But for now, this is fine. So if we play now, you can see that we start off with 50, run into the pain causing volume, we actually get our health to decrease. So we have the communication set up now to use this model view and data set in here as a whole chain in between them. Now, let's expand upon this a little bit further. Let's say that we wanted to add something else in our HUD here. Let's say we wanted to add a progress bar. So we add a progress bar. We add it to, let's put it in the middle over here. Let's scale it a little bit. This won't be super beautiful or anything like that, but it'll be fine. So our progress bar over here, it works with percentages. So currently we don't have any way to deal with that, but we have the ability between max health and health to actually represent this. So what we can do here is we add a notification bell for our max health as well, because we may need to change when our max health is changed. And we add a function which represents the information that we need here. So we can get health percentage or something like that. Something that's very descriptive. So a function can work in the same way as the variables do. So they can also be used as something that you listen to. You can see here we have a field notify bell here as well. There are a few constraints for this, however. One of them is we need to have an output, which in this case we'll just call percentage and make sure it is of the type float. So that's one thing. We can also put in the calculations for that. So we're going to get the health, we're going to get the max health, and we're going to divide the health by the max health, and thus we get the percentage of what our current health is in relation to our max health. So that's one thing. That's one thing that this function requires. One output from this and no more than that. It also requires that you don't have any inputs, which we don't have, so we meet that criteria as well. But we still can't press the bell here. The reason for that is we also need to set this as pure, which is essentially saying that we're not going to be affecting any data, we're just going to be reading data. That's one way to look at it anyway. Still, we can't actually set this field notify, it's still grayed out over here. That's because under advanced we also need to check the constant. Once we have this we can now activate our bell, which allows this function now to be used in a similar way as we did with our health before here. So how this works is, how do you determine when health is changed? Because this is a function, right? Well, on each of these variables, go over here like on the health, we have the field notify, we have a drop down here. We can see where when I change to this variable, which things should be notifying. So if you're bound to the health, this will be updating it. If you were to bind to get health percentage, you would not be getting an update because this is not checked. But by doing that, making sure that when our health is changed, it should also notify anyone who's listening to the health percentage. That's how this connection works. So since max health could also theoretically be changed, and that affects the calculation for get health percentage in this case, we should make sure that this also updates when the health percentage, it notifies the health percentage listeners when max health is being changed. I hope that makes sense. Anyway, going to our HUD, we can now go and say, hey, we want to have our progress bar listen to our new function that we created, which is super awesome. And going down to our model view down here, we can see that we don't actually have anything like that right now. And the reason for this is most likely because this is in beta version. This is probably going to be a little bit more smooth moving forward. But for now, we're going to be having to say that, well, we want to add the view model, which now in an updated state shows that it actually has some updated variables. It has different statuses on max health, and we have a new function for get max, what's it called? Get percentage. This it will not like, as you can clearly see, because I already had a view model. So it's a little bit, if you want to do this safer than this is merely for demonstration. You probably want to remove the old view model first. But essentially this is what might happen if you're playing around with this. Like so. So here we are in the HUD. You can see now it updated with the new model view. What might happen, depending on version, is that you might have to remove this and then add it again instead. Make sure that if you remove it and add it again, that it has the proper parameters still here. So it's actually listed to work on the same model view that you had assigned, and that you have the same settings essentially on it, so that you know that it works. Going back to our progress bar, we now want to get its percent, which we have over here. So we want to drag and drop our function to the percent. And now, if we have done everything right and haven't broken something else, you can see that we have our progress bar here represents half-life, because that is what we had when we created this. However, since I crashed this, I do believe that we have lost the pain volume. So let's add the pain volume once more. So there, let's drag this box here as a reference again, just so we know where it is. Like so. We can see here that we actually started inside of it, but yeah, if we move inside, you can see that both the text is being updated and the progress is being updated. So hopefully now this brings you enough knowledge and understanding that you can actually make some simple use of this and actually build upon this a little bit. But now I can take a little bit of a moment here to explain some pros and cons with this, because if we bring up this beautiful drawing that I made, again, if you had something like an event dispatcher, one of the problems that you might run into is that you need to bind to this specific object over here that you have, which might be your character, for example, and then your character dies or something like that. You still have your UI, it's still bound to the old character, but you might be respawning a new character or taking control over a different character or something like that. And it might be a pretty common mistake that you don't actually make sure to rebind the information as this happens. So this is something that you can avoid while having model views, since you will not actually be communicating directly towards the blueprint that is representing your health. You'll become communicating with the model view instead. So if this connection is broken, the new character over here can just reestablish the connection and make sure that, hey, I want to update the model view again now. And whenever that happens, the UI, which is listening to the model view, actually gets this information, right? So that's one thing. So you get a little bit of a help when it comes to managing broken connections like this. Another thing is that you might have something like timing issues depending on what you're doing. Maybe you have a character or an object that isn't created and you try to bind to that object and it isn't ready to be bound to, for example, yet, or listened to with a bind directly. A model view doesn't necessarily need to be created in the character like I chose to do here. You can have this created somewhere completely different, since it's just a collection that is global in this case. Anyone can actually request to get access to a model view of a specific type that they want to, and then when they do, they start communicating with it, while a UI is just listening to this already created model view, and it doesn't really mind that the communicator to the model view doesn't exist yet. It doesn't really matter. It still listens to this information here, right? So that's one of the bigger pros, I would say. You also abstract it a little bit, making sure that you don't need to cast a specific kind of blueprint to make sure and listen. You can have something that's very generic when it comes to a model view that can be represented by a lot of different types of blueprints. You can also make it a bit modular. You can have a model view for lots of different things. You can have it for something like all your stats or a few stats or substats, and then you can break it up however much you want, and then you can have a bunch of different UIs, each of them listening to health, for example, but they're displaying it in different ways. So this one shows a progress bar, this one shows maybe health and stamina and wisdom and other things, and they represent it differently, but they read some or similar or all of the fields that are relative here. So this one over here, since it's a summary maybe of a bunch of different ones, might have a whole host of different model views added to its UI that it communicates with and such. So it gives a lot of flexibility in that case. When it comes to cons, there is of course the cause of if you were to go here and create a binding that would be super easy, even though it's really a bad approach of getting this sort of information. But even using event dispatchers in a character, for example, here would be much easier than a setup of what I created over here. But of course, if you remove the whole part of creating and adding a model view to a collection from your character, you would actually only be needing to, at some point, getting the model view that is of interest, or the model views that are of interest, depending on what kind of stats you have, right? So there might be a little bit more of a complex setup for this, but the gains, if those are pros that are useful to you, would of course outweigh those, I believe. Anyway, that's going to be all that we go through today. I hope that this was useful and that this is something that you consider using, because I think there are quite some comforts that you can get from this when you start using it. And it might only show as you try it and experiment a little bit with it, I believe. Also, this will mature as this moves out of beta, of course, so this might be even more streamlined and even more featureful than it is currently as well. So that's also a possible positive as well. Anyway, that's going to be all for now. Keep on learning. Take care. A big thank you to all of you who like, comment, subscribe and share my videos, or through other means support this channel. You are what makes this channel grow and become a resource for other people to learn from.